Hello, good morning and welcome to the Sunday Supplement. Coming up on today's show, Mark Sampson sacked by the FA, but did the head coach of the women's national team really have to go? Jose Mourinho, he's sent off at St Mary's, but Manchester United, they keep pace with City at the top of the Premier League. And Arsene Wenger, he claims the Champions League is losing its appeal ahead of Arsenal's 1,900-kilometre trip to play Bate Borisov in the Europa League. Three well-travelled men with us this morning. Paul Hayward is the chief sports writer at The Telegraph. Matt Dickinson is the chief sports writer at The Times. And Steve Bates is the chief football writer at The People. Morning, guys. Good to see you as ever. Don't forget, you can tweet the show at Sunday Sup. The best will appear on your screen over the next 90 minutes. Let's have a look at some of the papers then. What's making the headlines? The Sunday Times. They've got Mourinho on the front page of their sports section this morning. Manchester United did win at St Mary's last night, but Jose Mourinho was sent off in their 1-0 victory, scored by this man, Romelu Lukaku. He's gone for a song, but United released another statement about the chance aimed towards their goal-scoring forward. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the programme. Some transfer news. Ronald Koeman, he wants Olivier Giroud, the Arsenal striker. He's going for him in January. The Abala story in Steve's paper this morning in the Sunday People, that Mourinho wants him. He's a target for Manchester United. £155 million. Costs big money, but he's a good player. Is the heat on? Slaven Bilic, the Sunday Express say yes. Bilic on his way out as the West Ham manager. They lost 3-2 yesterday at Olympic Stadium against Tottenham. And we're coming on to this story straight away. The FA shambles, according to Nick Harris and Rob Draper on the back page of The Man on Sunday this morning, after Mark Sampson, the England women's head coach, is sacked by the organisation. The culture of fear, according to Jonathan Northcroft in his piece this morning. Oliver Holt in the sports section of The Mail on Sunday. A good week for women's football. He goes on to talk at length about the state of the English game in this piece. And Daniel Taylor, he says now that Dan Ashworth, the technical director at the FA, he must answer the questions. He's in Daniel's firing line this morning. Daniel Taylor, I have to say, in the Observer, has been leading the way in the Guardian and Observer throughout this murky story. It's a tawdry tale, Paul, but that's where we must start this morning. Mark Sampson sacked by the FA. In your view, did he have to go?
Well, let's distinguish between the two cases. That's really important. The current inquiry into things he's alleged to have said to England players that may be of a racial nature, that's one thing. And then secondly, there is this Bristol issue and what he did or didn't do in his time as a coach in Bristol. I'm uncomfortable with the fact that they've sacked him for whatever happened in Bristol. That's their reason. That's the excuse given. The timing is obviously highly convenient at a point where they've had this problem with the England women's team and his conduct there. But I don't see how in employment law you can go back to a case that you decided wasn't an issue, go back and reread a report and find evidence against somebody that you ignored at the time and then decide 2 or 3 years later that they should be dismissed. So I think, if they're going to sack him over the other thing when the inquiry is complete, that's one thing. But to go back and sack him for something they didn't sack him for in the first place, I don't see how that's right.
Time is everything, Paul. Why now?
Well, good question. It looks to all the world as if the FA have decided this guy's too difficult, he's giving them too many problems, they don't want any of this on their watch, and they'll just go back and find an excuse to fire him. They've got an awful lot of questions to answer about how they examined all that evidence and how they have now decided that he needs to be out of the building, but at the same time can still work in football. To me, this is a story about FA ineptitude, not about Mark Sampson, really.
I think it's definitely about FA ineptitude. I think it's a bit of both. I mean, obviously Martin Glenn, the FA chief executive, thinks he is righting a wrong by getting rid of him now. I haven't read the full report. The trouble is he's part of that wrong. It's been. I was at the press conference they did midweek, and there's a very conscious attempt to try and throw, shall we say, former FA employees under the bus. Trevor Brooking got named, singled out as he was in charge of the process, and then a former head of HR has suddenly appeared in the papers out of nowhere. And there is a very conscious attempt to sort of say this is part of an old regime. Well, no, it wasn't, because, as we know, Martin Glenn was there and found out about this inquiry into Sampson and could have looked at it any time in the last 2 years, in which time the FA gave Mark Sampson a new contract. So it's not good enough for the current regime to sort of say these were mistakes of the past, even if they say they feel they're right in a wrong. I mean, the real nightmare I have, say, in being at that press conference, is the talk of inappropriate behaviour. but none of us know on what scale that is. You know, we've all heard, I'm sure around this table, heard different versions.
We know it wasn't illegal, for example.
Yeah, but that's, you know, there's an awful lot of people, and when I do show, you know, there's I think a lot of discomfort that Mark Sampson is basically at the moment being judged on a lack of evidence. You know, we've been asked to take it as you know, take the FA's word that this was inappropriate without having any detail. And I don't think anyone's comfortable with that situation.
You went to the press conference, a lot of criticism because it was called with 2 hours' notice, which is highly unusual for the FA to call a press conference at that short notice. So, one, your thoughts on that, Matt, and secondly, where was Dan Ashworth? Why wasn't he there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think on the press conference itself, yeah, it was highly unusual, and also raised the question of why they allowed Mark Sampson to, you know, if this is a guy they think, right, this guy's got to get out, why they were allowing him to take an England game the night before. I mean, they said, oh, we had to sort of cross the T's and dot the I's, but really, you know, it just, that bit of it seemed crass. You know, you let him be hugged by his players the night before and suddenly you sack him the next morning. So that wasn't great. What was the other bit?
Where's Dan Ash?
Dan Ashworth, absolutely. Well, I think Dan Ash was almost certainly going to get dragged before a parliamentary. You know, if he won't face us lot, he's going to certainly have to face MPs, I think. Yep. He is part of this story because he was involved in the recruitment process, was impressed by Sampson at recruitment, and that obviously raises questions about what questions were asked about what happened previously. We were told that the FA were warned in various different ways about potential problems going back to Bristol. He was Sampson's line manager when this inquiry was completed. So why, if you're line manager, are you not saying, you know, I need to know. If I'm going to back this guy, I need to know what he's done wrong. I need to know the full extent of it.
Mm-hmm. Steve, what does it say about the reaction of the players? Because Matt just mentioned all the hugs and the reaction of England's players when they beat Russia 6-0 in that World Cup qualifier. What does that tell you about his relationship with them?
It's highly embarrassing, really, for the FA to have got themselves in a position where they've now embroiled another group of players in the same mess. Because, you know, obviously those players were celebrating that 6-0 win over Russia. Yet, how do the people at the centre of this allegation, you know, Lukaku, Spence, how do they feel about, and others within that team, how do they feel about their colleagues in the dressing room celebrating with a manager who is being deemed not fit to run the England team? Mm-hmm. It's a mess. It's just a huge mess. I mean, if you go back to the fact that an FA safeguarding unit decided that Sampson needed to go on a course to reinforce the boundaries between coach and player, surely you've got a serious issue. And I can't get past the fact that in itself was overlooked, and then he was appointed England coach. And, well, listen, we know England, the FA have a history of sacking England.
Steve, it's not unheard of for an employed circuit. We'd like to employ you, but you just need a bit more training before, if we're going to employ you. And that's what the FA have done, isn't it?
Well,
that's what the FA did.
I suppose those are the bald facts, but I mean the fact that he was put on a course to correct inappropriate behaviour, it basically tells you everything. I mean, why was he then employed? I agree with Paul, the fact that he's now clearly being held to account and being sacked for something not that he's just done now, but for a historical incident.
Yeah.
And, you know, that can't be right. And, you know, if he's being held to account for that, I'm absolutely certain Martin Glenn, Greg Clark, maybe Dan Ashworth should be held to account for their part in what is a mess. I mean, just going on to the point that this is the second England manager that's lost his job in 12 months. Sam Allardyce was rushed out of his England job, for me, with indecent haste. For doing what? We're still not clear what he actually did wrong. Certainly nothing illegal, as Mark Sampson appears to have done nothing illegal. Well,
that's I mean, I wrote a piece about this. It reminds me of the Palios. I remember when Mark Palios came in and said, oh, you know, I want to raise the standards. I want to be this FA to stand for morality in the game and
transparency.
Absolutely got tied in knots and then ended up having to resign himself a few months later. And I think there are echoes in the way Martin Glenn has basically said, you know, Sam Allardyce, he's not broken anything under FA rules, but we're going to get rid of him because there's a conduct issues and the FA stand for more than that. The same with Mark Sampson. It's the same sort of language about, we are I think he used the word impeccable or unimpeachable at the press conference this week.
They sacked Allardyce, Matt, for poor judgment, basically.
Yeah. But
and Sampson, obviously, at Bristol, was guilty of poor judgment.
But it's interesting, if you start sacking people for not breaking FA rules, then it's setting an interestingly high bar and an interestingly high precedent for what comes down the line.
With Allardyce, they never even bothered to find out whether he had broken any rules or not. That was the point. They didn't investigate it, did they? They didn't assess it. They just decided it was all too embarrassing. Allardyce had put them in an awkward spot. Let's just get rid,
Well, also into this kind of absolute total mess, Gareth Southgate has been dragged in because he, at a recent press conference that I was at St George's Park, he was asked about his views of Mark Sampson, and he gave Mark Sampson absolute glowing reference and saying he was an upstanding guy who, fully had his support. So now kind of Gareth is kind of by association dragged into this whole.
Well, he'll be asked about that on Thursday because he knows an England squad.
I'm absolutely certain he will be asked about his past comments about Mark Sampson and now where we find ourselves now.
Okay. Well, the FA say Mark Sampson is free to carry on working in football. He's not broken any rules.
Good luck with that.
I was going to say,
but he's a pariah to us. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there another argument? Is there a counter argument? Rod Liddell makes it certainly in the Sunday Times this morning, Paul. And you isolated the two cases, the historical references to when he was a coach at Bristol. And then, of course, the latest allegations, Drew Spence, Eniola Aluko, as well. Liddell makes the point that, if he did indeed make the comments to those players, big if, crass, stupid, witless and mildly offensive, even if meant in jest. That's Rod Liddell's argument in the Sunday Times this morning, that if he'd have apologised for it, if someone had boxed him around the ears and said, look, you just can't say those things in the modern world, modern society, it's inappropriate, it's unacceptable, that everyone would be able to move on harmoniously. Would they be able to?
No, I don't think so, because anybody making the kind of comments that he's alleged to have made to England players has clearly got the worst possible judgment, apart from it being offensive to a black footballer. If you as England manager or England coach don't realise that you shouldn't be saying stuff like that, you shouldn't be in the job, because it's a basic question of intelligence and judgment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned, Matt, that the FA will face parliamentary questions. In terms of the usual round of stories about the FA cleaning up its act, what can be done?
Well,
what would you do?
I think we've done this show before, haven't we?
Well, we've seen an England head coach go. We're going to see how in the firing line of Danny Taylor now is Dan Ashworth. Will others go?
Well, I think there's a lot more to come out before before any of them are safe. That's for sure. I mean, I think Martin Glenn. I guess one of the many sort of ironies of this is that he was seen as possibly one of the safer hands we've had on the FA tiller in a long time. He was seen as he comes from a very sort of solid background. I think he's got came with a decent amount of respect from other football figures. He's worked around the game, but there's a lot of sort of sticky territory for them to cross first. As Dan Ashworth, as I say, answering those questions about why he wasn't inquisitive about this inquiry. Martin Glenn answering the same questions. I don't think there is an appetite at the FA board. I'm pretty sure there's not one at the moment to. As someone described it to one of my colleagues this week, it's a yellow card offence, not a red card, as it stands. But that, as I say, that's as it stands, and I think there's a lot more to come.
Sure.
About the FA and about Mark Sampson's behaviour at Bristol.
Are you surprised by the way, in any way surprised by the way that this story took hold, the grip it's had on the media? Because the FA elevated the women's game, didn't it? There's no doubt about that. You think back to the Olympics in London, certainly the World Cup, of course, the European Championships in the summer, making it to the semi-final before the defeat against Ollie's point.
That's Ollie's point in his column. And I guess he's saying that this in some ways shows that the women's game has been taken more seriously, and the fact that stuff like this can't just be sort of brushed away as it may have been in the past of sort of who cares about it? Well, actually, a lot of people do care about it, and if the FA are going to trumpet and champion the women's game, they need to
Which they have done.
Yeah,
There's no one would dispute that. Would they?
Absolutely no one would dispute that. But if you're going to do that, you then have to make sure that your head of the women's team is judged the same way as the men's team, and you have to make sure that all the standards you sort of preach about are held across the whole thing.
Had this been the men's national manager, let's not use Southgate as the example, and men's national team coach, would this story have taken off earlier? It took a while, and also I sensed the nervousness in newspapers about whether or not this was for them.
Yeah.
Is this a news story? Is this sport? Is this football? Does it move across those different disciplines? I sense there was a different approach to this than there would have been for the men's national team.
I'm not sure. It was a slow burn for sure.
Yeah.
But and I'm sure because of the nature of the men's game and the focus on England in this country, it would have been a massive, monstrous story. The fact that it's still a big story in my view.
It's turned into one.
It has turned into one, yeah. And the FA are they're seriously under the microscope now. I mean, I think regardless of the issue of this being about women's football, for me, it just encapsulates the incompetence at the FA. This could have been about anything really. We've seen it before, the FA are just wholly inadequate sometimes at dealing with these kind of situations. They get themselves in a mess. The right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. I mean, it's a fundamentally flawed organisation. We've been here so many times before, people suggest it should be ripped up and start again. But the FA as a body is just fatally flawed all the way down, the way it's structured. We've seen numerous, Matt has just alluded to Mark Palios being chief executive at one point. We've had numerous chairmen. Lord Treesman, who was a past chairman, not long ago sort of suggested that the government should get involved and try to force through some reforms for the FA because it's a seriously flawed organisation.
One of the issues is the initial report into Sampson came back in a period when there wasn't a chief executive, which I'm sure would have been part of the problem. There was an interim, so it sort of fell between regimes, and that's a sort of classic situation where clearly this report was on someone's desk, who wasn't even in the job for more than a few months, and he's thinking, I need this.
It shouldn't have remained unopened for 2 years, though.
No, reports look good, but you've got to read them, haven't you?
Yeah. If you look at, as Steve said, if you look at the major issues of the last 20 or 30 years, the FA hasn't been fit to function. I mean, Hillsborough, the England team, the child abuse scandal, now this, it is not operating properly. No.
OK, the one question I haven't asked, guys, is who should get the job? If it was the men's national team, we'd be saying, who's the next man in? Next woman in, Emma Hayes. There you go, heard it here first. OK, next up we're going to talk Manchester. Manchester City, they beat Palace yesterday. Manchester United, they won at St Mary's. But we're going to talk about those chants aimed at Romelu Lukaku. It's coming next here on the Sunday Supplement. OK, let's talk Manchester City now. Big win for them yesterday against Crystal Palace up at the Etihad. Steve, it's all coming together for Pep Guardiola. He's even got the ball boys getting the ball back into play quicker after a little pep talk with one of them yesterday during their win. But are they convincing you?
Oh, absolutely, most definitely. I mean, you've only got to look at the goals they're scoring at the minute. They're blowing teams away with just a complete disregard, really, which is frightening in many ways for the Premier League.
Frighteningly good? Frighteningly bad?
Well, frighteningly bad if you're playing them, because it doesn't seem anybody's going to stop them at the moment. Even when they played Liverpool, they kind of completely and utterly dismantled them after they'd had a player sent off. So they are a formidable team. I get the feeling that Pep, who's got incredibly high standards and wants to achieve sort of big things, I suspect that he will only really be happy if his team are doing this in the Champions League later on in the competition. Because for me, I think, looking at the whole Manchester scene, I think Jose Mourinho at United would be very, very happy to win the Premier League this season. I suspect that's not Pep Guardiola's ultimate goal. I think he wants to win the Champions League because I think foreign coaches have more of an identification with that tournament as being the benchmark of really how good you are. City are clearly way too good for most of the teams in the Premier League. And it will probably come down to the fact that, obviously, at the moment, the two Manchester clubs are out there on their own. It will probably come down to, it could well come down to 2 games, those 2 Manchester derbies, about, you know, which determines which way this will go. But it's a fascinating, for me, it's a fascinating sort of juxtaposition of the 2 philosophies. Pep's all about, you know, speed, football, playing passes, keeping on the move. Jose's about power, aggression, strength, two absolute opposite philosophies.
Who would you rather watch?
But both are capable of winning the Premier League with that philosophy. Obviously, I mean, City's the more eye-catching style. But listen, this is early days. City, you know, 10 games unbeaten, I think, last season, and then the wheels came off a little bit. You can't really see that happening with this team, because even though Vincent Kompany has been out in the early stages again with injury, City are so good going forward. I think the defensive issues are less of a problem than they probably have been in the past.
Yeah. In terms of Pep's vision, is this becoming this kind of dreamy football that we thought we saw at Bayern Munich, and obviously particularly at Barcelona?
I think it's getting close to it at times, isn't it? And like you say, the rotating cast of strikers, I mean, it's you know, staggering just to see you could even have that sort of array of choice. I do think the defensive issues are probably going to come back and bite them at some stage, certainly latter end of Champions League, you know, when you're up against the best in the world. I think I look at that back line and think, you know, are they going to get found out? And like Steve says, I mean, it feels like we've got the Pep Jose battle that we sort of thought, was it going to be last season? It's been delayed a year, but it's certainly sort of worth the wait, shaping up. And as Steve says again, it's just great that you watch United, and yesterday was a classic sort of Mourinho grafting, you know, Rashford tackling back at corner flags sort of performance against the sort of City slickers, and it's going to be great. I think early December is the first derby, isn't it? And you sort of feel like you're counting down the days already.
Sure. Not a great start for Roy Hodgson, is it? They lost his first game against Southampton at Selhurst Park last weekend. They're on this run now. They play Manchester City, beaten 5-0 there. Manchester United next, followed by Chelsea, Paul. Palace lost 6 in a row in the Premier League, haven't scored yet. Can Hodgson get them out of it?
Well, when he took the job, I thought he could, because I think he's got enough to work with there, and he took the job so early in the season. You know, he didn't take it in January when the team's already in deep trouble. But the problem is, once you get to 6, 7, 8 games without a win, historically that suggests you are going down, and even though you might have 30 games left to try and make up the ground, a start like that tends to kill you. I still think that once he applies his formula, which we saw at Fulham and West Brom and so on, they will start to become much more effective. But of course, you know, it's rotten luck to get off to a start like that and then face City, United and Chelsea, because, you know, that really pushes you down, doesn't it?
Yeah.
People have written off this kind of run of results, though, Paul. You know, against obviously playing City, United, Chelsea to come. People have almost written that off and said, well, listen, we'll just put that to one side. We're not going to get anything out of that. But Ash will remember quite clearly when Sam Allardyce went to Crystal Palace, he actually won those tough games. That's why
there's a theme developing there, isn't there?
Steve, but that wasn't that later in the season.
It was later in the season.
When they were right up against it.
Yeah,
here,
but
you're playing two teams in rampant
Crystal Palace did
form.
win against odds, that kind of fixture. Now, I think if Palace are going to be successful under Hodgson, they can't afford to just write these fixtures off and then say, right, we're really going to start mid-October when these games are out the way.
You certainly can't afford to write them off 5-0. You need to get to some.
You cannot do that.
No, sure.
How are you going to find a way to get Sam Allardyce into part 3, 4 and 5 of this
No, it's just a coincidence.
Yeah, of course it is. Is there a gap, though, developing, a bigger gap between the elite level clubs who've got 40, 50, 60 first team professionals or professional footballers, players who are in 25-man squad, beyond that, of course, in their academy sides? Is there a gap developing between those sides in the top 4, 5, 6 positions in the Premier League and then those teams at the foot of the Premier League?
I probably wouldn't even go top 5, top 6. I'd just go top 3, really. You know, the two Manchester clubs and Chelsea clearly have got formidable squads. And, you know, obviously people pride themselves on the fact that anybody can beat anybody in the Premier League. Well, actually, I don't think that's actually sort of true at this moment in time, because I cannot see anybody beating Manchester City, for instance. Chelsea went to Stoke yesterday, a notoriously difficult place to go. Chelsea just like 4-0.
And made big changes as well,
And
ahead of the Champions
And
League
made
game
big
against
changes.
Atletico Madrid.
So that is a sign that that there is a division of quality at the top between them and the rest. And the fact that the two Manchester clubs are clearly sort of blazing a trail early on shows that there is a gap, because if that continues, then those two clubs, and I think Chelsea will join them, will be way ahead of the rest by Christmas.
Is it a dangerous gap, Matt?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, we've actually been considering. We all thought that the super clubs were getting entrenched over recent years. Actually, we've had the joys of Leicester. Obviously, Tottenham have punched above their weight, coming second. You know, the fact is that we've been pleasantly surprised. You know, United plunged, didn't they, post Fergie? So actually, there's been more volatility than you'd expect. So,
Mind you,
and if we want to see English clubs do well in the Champions League, which I'm sure we all do, we need some of them to step up, and I think the two Manchester clubs and Chelsea are doing that at the moment under obviously top level management.
Yeah. Mind you, when Leicester won the league, we all started saying that the middle class clubs had got stronger because they got more money, they were hanging on to more of their good players. I think the pendulum swung back the other way actually, and the top three clubs have dealt with that threat really, and those teams in the middle rank have got no chance of getting anywhere near, you know, squads that have Manchester City's calibre, for example.
Yeah,
I mean, those clubs, those middle and lower clubs are spending a lot of money for sure, but it's the top clubs who are buying the really elite players,
the match-winning players
that make the difference.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Manchester United, they've got match-winning players, haven't they? Because they've got Lukaku on the pitch, which we'll come to him in a moment. His goal scoring, as well as some of the chants that are directed in by his own supporters at United. But first, let's clear up Mourinho. His dismissal yesterday. Hugs Mike Jones on the touchline, doesn't he? After encroaching during the final few moments of that victory yesterday, but he was sent off by Craig Pawson. What will happen? Did he make the right decision? And what will happen?
I mean, it's hardly crime of the century, was it? And then the game was in its closing moments. I don't think there was any intent by Mourinho to create a situation. I think he was just wrapped up in the fact that his team were under the cosh a little bit, and he wanted to see the game out. I'm not certain it'll lead to any huge ban. He might get a one-match kind of.
So you're putting it down to raw enthusiasm.
Well,
if there was no intent from Bayern Mourinho to create a situation, that would be a first. I think we'll write that down in history as the day Mourinho didn't try and create a situation.
Yeah. Okay. Will anything come of this with the FA?
Well, once you're sent off, you know, they've got presumably they'll ask the referee why. He'll say because there was an infringement and
one-match ban.
Yeah, I mean, but then we all know that bans for managers are worth nothing, are they? I mean, they get.
He got banned last season for kicking a water bottle, didn't he? To the West Ham game, which presumably that was just a bit of over enthusiasm and exuberance.
I think so. Yeah, I think he's just venting his frustrations and listen. It's not. I don't think it's crime of the century. I mean, you know, really. I mean, referees, fourth officials seem to be now more of the focus on the touchline than the actual referee, and are making quite a lot of those sort of decisions and alerting the referee to stuff. You know,
yeah, one of those things.
Can't see a major problem with. Can't see a major problem with that, to be honest.
Okay, we've got a major problem with the chants directed at Lukaku. I won't ask you to sing it for us, Paul.
No, good.
Or even use any of the words involved in that particular song. But what are your views on Manchester United's stance towards it? Lukaku as well, of course, on social media has responded to it, but reacted to it. But what are your own thoughts?
I think Manchester United are right to point out that that's a very dubious chant because of the associations. I think some of the associations are maybe not clear to some of the people singing it. It's an image or an idea rooted in sort of plantations and slavery, basically, to be blunt about it, and it's not something that black people, want to have used against them or in the context of their lives. So it's a dubious chant, and I think it's right that Manchester United have pointed that out.
Exactly. I mean, there's been some very, I think, sort of shrewd pieces written about this week trying to explain to people, because, you know, we've all heard it of, you know, it's a compliment and it celebrates Lukaku, and say some very good writers have written about the stereotyping is bad, and just people who think they are praising actually, well, if you're someone who stereotypes, you're as liable to stereotype in a negative way as you are in a positive way. You know, best avoid stereotypes altogether.
Yeah.
However much you think you are celebrating Romelu Lukaku.
I mean, listen, that was an away game yesterday for United. United's support away from Old Trafford is a completely different demographic than the one that goes to Old Trafford. I was at the Burton Cup game in midweek, and there was no hint of that chant at all. Clearly yesterday, football fans don't like being told what they can and can't sing.
But it was a defiance, was they said, we'll sing what we want.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, Tottenham have been under the spotlight for singing certain songs, and it'd be difficult to stop them to do that. Apparently United are now looking at CCT evidence. I'm not sure if a whole end's doing it, what action you can actually take other than just appealing to the better nature of them, and you know, that kind of racial stereotyping is not really acceptable. And there are a whole number of different chants you could be singing about Romelu Lukaku that are probably more appropriate. So.
Well, that's exactly, and that's the other point.
Sometimes
isn't it?
when you tell people not to do something, then their first reaction is to do it. So
that's the other point, isn't it? Again, someone, I can't remember who wrote it this week, but it's just saying, you know, you've got one of the world's best strikers. You know, he's a brilliant player. He speaks 6 languages. He's a bright. You know, he was talking in an interview about how he studies the best strikers in the world. You've got his movement, his goals. You've got so much to celebrate about him. Come up with a better song than that.
Yeah. Okay. They have got plenty to sing about with the way the team is performing, though, Steve.
yeah,
Is it all coming together for Mourinho in the Premier League with United?
I think it is. You know, I think obviously he had his first season last season. It was fairly successful, really, winning a couple of trophies, 3 he would say, with a Community Shield. So he clearly needs to step that up to another level of sort of silverware this season. And I think he's created a new identity there amongst his group of players. Very, very cleverly, he's tapped into this current team, the youth, the speed, the ambition of it. He's trying to distance himself, I think, from the past United eras that Ferguson was involved with. And he's clearly looking to create his own history and identity with this group of players. I think it's working. He alluded to the fact after the midweek game that he saw a happiness about the way they play, and I think that's welcome for everybody at Old Trafford. You know, after 4 years really where they were just in the wilderness, really, you know, relatively speaking, as to where United had been. The Van Gaal era was a turgid kind of episode in their history. Okay, Mourinho isn't Pep. He doesn't play that kind of fast-flowing, glorious football. He's more methodical. He's probably he's not as far as Van Gaal was in terms of his robotic approach. He's probably somewhere in the middle. It's working for United at the moment. People say, oh yeah, well, people are happy to accept this while United are sort of improving and getting back to where they need to be. But at some point, United fans are going to want United to play the type of the football City are playing. Whether that will happen under Mourinho, I'm not quite so sure. But for the moment, certainly what he's doing is working, because you've only got to look at the top of the table to see that.
Is there any sense? Do you sense any tension, or is there any tension between Mourinho and Guardiola?
I don't think so. I think, you know,
In the way that when they were at Barcelona and Real Madrid.
Yeah, there clearly was. Yeah,
there was.
It appears they seem to have moved on, almost as though they've got a pact between themselves to say, listen, let's not let this develop into what it did there. I'm absolutely certain they've not had that conversation. But I think Mourinho probably realises he has a responsibility now, being in charge of Manchester United, that he cannot go on poking other coaches in the eye when he's a Manchester United manager. That clearly wouldn't be acceptable.
Let's see what one of them says when they come out on the wrong side of the derby first.
Yeah.
Let's
I mean,
always say there's a
could
piece
be the
back
first
going.
time they trip.
Listen, there's an undercurrent there. There's always going to be an undercurrent, particularly when they're head-to-head for titles.
There should be, and we hope there is.
Yeah, of course,
well, makes the better story. But I mean, everybody's saying at the moment, you know, everything's fine with Mourinho and United. Hunky-dory, he loves the crowd, loves the players, loves the club. Inevitably, those things don't tend to last with Mourinho, but maybe this time it could be different.
Yeah, so far so good for Manchester United and for Manchester City. OK, next up, we're back to the Chants. Chelsea, they've got a new one for Alvaro Morata. Is he really better than Harry Kane? Welcome back. With us this morning, Paul Hayward, Matt Dickinson and Steve Bates. Let's just remind you what's in the papers this morning. Who needs Diego? Diego Costa. He's at Atletico Madrid now, but Chelsea have got this man, Alvaro Morata, scored a hat-trick yesterday in Chelsea's thumping 4-0 victory up at Stoke. Steve's story this morning, Paulo Dybala at Juventus, Manchester United. He's a target for Manchester United. It'll cost them £155 million to get him, though, in the January window. Look who's cut up rough. That's Wayne Rooney. Wasn't happy yesterday after being elbowed in their victory over Bournemouth. Rooney came off yesterday, having started the game. Give me 5. Manchester City scoring 5 against Crystal Palace up at the Etihad. The Sunday Express, they're putting the pressure on. Slaven Bilic lost against Tottenham yesterday. Steve was at that game. We'll come on to that in a moment. But Neil Fizzler here saying that Slaven Bilic is under threat as the West Ham manager. This man isn't under threat. Lukaku can't stop scoring. He's gone for a song. United going after their supporters, though, with yet another statement about those chants that directed at him. But he did score again yesterday. He scored the winner. And lots of talk about Mark Sampson and the FA. The FA shambles is the Mail on Sunday's take on events at the FA this week with Mark Sampson sacked. The culture of fear is Jonathan Northcroft's piece in the Sunday Times. And the man, it has to be said, who's led the way on this story, Daniel Taylor. He's now got Dan Ashworth, the FA's technical director, in his sights. And based on what Taylor's been doing over the last few weeks, you'd have to say, watch out, Dan. OK, let's talk West Ham Tottenham. And Harry Kane's performance yesterday. Mauricio Pochettino said that he's in love with him several times after that game. Are you in love with him?
Well, listen, you can't argue with his goal record. And you know, I watched him yesterday, and he was the difference in a first half where West Ham were kind of giving a decent account of themselves, but he was just the difference, you know. And when you have players like that in the team, those are the contributions they make. His goal record is just getting better, sort of month by month. I suppose the long-term question for Tottenham is how long can they sort of keep him, especially if they're not winning the kind of trophies that Harry Kane probably feels he should be winning. He does seem quite a loyal guy and has got a loyalty to the club. But for sure, I'm absolutely certain that although this summer there was kind of minimal Harry Kane sort of leaving stories, I'm certain we're going to see next summer, if Tottenham haven't sort of made a significant advance in winning something.
It's interesting you make that point. We'll digress slightly here because I want to talk about the strikers because Morata and of course Diego Costa as well. But the moment a Tottenham player starts doing well, we always start talking about, OK, when are they going to leave? Harry Kane's always said he's committed to Tottenham.
Yeah, he has.
But Tom Hopkinson's story in your paper this morning about Dele Alli, he says he's changing his agents because he basically pretty much wants to line up a move to Manchester United or Real Madrid, and the only way he thinks he can do it is by moving to an agent who's promising him, OK, well, look, I'll get you this move, don't worry, I've got the in with these football clubs. This is a different story with him, isn't it?
I think the best way for Dele Alli to get a move is to start playing the way Harry Kane plays. I watched Dele Alli yesterday, and OK, he was involved in a couple of goals, but he wasn't really as convincing as you would like him to be. And you know, the boy's got huge talent, but whereas Kane's clearly shifted his game onto a different level now. I noticed a piece that Paul did on Saturday morning, and where he sort of alludes to the fact that, you know, he's a global striker now. He's not just one of England's best strikers. He's a striker that's being noticed everywhere in the world, and that's quite right. And his goals yesterday were just absolutely encapsulated what he is now. He's just a ruthless goal scorer who has got that kind of mentality about him that he wants to get better and better. And I think, you know, that is the worry for Tottenham.
On the contract thing, I think it will be fascinating to see whether Harry Kane is a bit different from the other players, because I know when he was one of the first to re-sign a long contract, and actually part of the sort of agitation there is that some of the players think he settled too low. You know, he signed £100,000 a contract, and the subsequent sort of the Danny Rose stuff and some of the agitating that we've been hearing about is actually based on the fact that, you know, Daniel Levy says, look, Harry Kane was no fuss. He's our star player. He settled for this. If he's worth this, you guys should settle for less. And that's actually been a sort of internal cause of it. You know, he seems to, as you say, he seems to be different. He seems to be not the agitating type. He seems to be happy where he is. But how long that lasts. Almost that's the question for Tottenham Hotspur, isn't it?
I think
Well, he's got a contract for the next 5 years. So
Yeah.
he's showing his commitment, and Tottenham are showing their commitment to him. I just want to finish off on this point about Dele Alli. Steve says he needs to pretty much buckle down. Is your message, isn't it? Should he be thinking in these terms? Real Madrid, Manchester United, Barcelona. Should he be thinking about his next move?
I certainly agree that his game is slightly stalled in a way, because I think the play breaks down around him too often. You know, he is capable of these magic moments, and he makes a huge contribution to the team, but I don't think he's quite efficient enough yet. Too often things stop when they get to him. You see that yesterday, didn't you?
Yesterday, a couple of times,
Yeah.
you know, they had attacks Tottenham where they could have punished West Ham and put the game beyond doubt, and it broke down around Dele Alli.
him. Yeah, and that he's going to have to eliminate that from his game if he's going to play at somewhere like Real Madrid. They won't tolerate that at Real Madrid. You know?
Yeah, sure. Okay, let's go back to the strikers and Alvaro Morata, because he scored 3 yesterday for Chelsea in the week that Diego Costa signed for Atletico Madrid. Have Chelsea got a good deal out of this? Big money for Costa. Hasn't been handled particularly well by anybody here. I guess Chelsea perhaps more dignified and honourable than Costa's, certainly than Costa's behaviour over the last few months. But they've got this man who can't stop scoring.
Yeah, I mean, if they got 57 million, I think it's actually a bit less than clearly they would, you know, that was on the table from China. It's a bit less probably than his real value is, but considering the grief that they've been through to get to this point, and considering basically, you know, he's not going to play for them again, I think that's what they've got to take. I think it's the only... Morata looks an absolute class act, and we were both at the Chelsea-Arsenal game, and it was at that game when it was Chelsea felt a bit toothless. You know, you wanted him in that game probably to be more physical. You know, it felt like he was being a little bit sort of bullied. And I think that's, to be honest, we've seen it on a lot of players coming to the English game. I think part of what he may be still learning is just, you know, basically to bruise up a bit. But yeah, that's to be expected. But he is a class act. There's no two ways about it. And I thought some of those runs that were sort of almost like the inside forward runs yesterday is almost a bit of Ruud van Nistelrooy about him. You know, he's not lightning quick, but he seems to just have that way of spinning and taking on defenders. He moves like a bit of a Rolls Royce. I mean, he's tall. He's got a lovely sort of athletic way about him. He's clearly a finisher. So he looks a class act, but in losing Costa, obviously there's a sort of degree of, OK, we've taken a lone striker for a lone striker, but they haven't got a lot in depth forward-wise, and I think that's still an area they might have to look at in January to get another centre-forward.
So yeah, Conte talked on Friday about aggression and Morata needing to be more aggressive, and I think that was a reflection of the fact the game that we were at, where once Arsenal got on top of Morata physically, Chelsea became pretty innocuous at that point, didn't they? So in that game, you'd have rather had Costa up front because he'd have made something happen and settled the Arsenal centre-backs. But in the Stoke game, you saw the quality that Morata has, that you know, that counter-attacking speed, that elegance and skill that Matt's talked about. I think in the long term, you'd rather have that, really, wouldn't you, than all the problems that Costa brings. It just happens that in some games, the Arsenal game being an example, they miss Costa's aggression, physicality, call it what you will.
And he just, back to goal. They need, certainly in that game, they need Morata. The ball was just coming off him too easily. But as I say, I think, you know, there's been plenty of players that have needed 6 months. I mean, his goal rate doesn't need any time to adjust. No, but I think that's just part of the adjustment.
Yeah, he's really good.
So the Chelsea fans have cleaned up their act in terms of the song for him. They say he's from sunny Spain. He's better than Harry Kane, is he?
Better than Harry Kane.
Is that a controversial chant?
I'm sure we can do something. Find it. It's always sunny in Spain, is it?
Yeah.
Depends where you are.
Stereotyping Spain.
Are we judging him already on that? Yeah. No, I mean, I think what's his goal rate now? 6 in 6-ish, is it, in the Premier League?
Harry or Morata?
Morata,
3 from Morata, yes. Yeah. 3 from Morata and loves a header as well.
Better. They're both looking pretty good. I mean, let's come back to that one.
This man's sitting on the fence.
After more than 6 matches.
I think one of the players.
Are we allowed?
Steve, you're not allowed to sit on the fence. Six goals in the Premier League from Morata this season.
I'd take Harry Kane every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
I would. Yeah, I think one of the pleasures.
Taking corners. He's very good at taking corners.
One of the pleasures of this season is that we've got, you know, 3 strikers really: Lukaku, Morata, and Kane. That's you know, it's impressive.
And that's without the City
without all the
contingent
midfielders
as well.
Yeah, thinking about Aguero up front. Yeah, of course. Yeah, and Jesus was on the bench yesterday. I want to talk as well about Slaven Bilic because you were at that game yesterday. The atmosphere around the club, because of course 3-0 down at one point. What does Bilic have a future here?
I think he
Do
does.
you sense he has a future?
I do sense he has a future. You know, particularly in the evidence of the last half hour yesterday. Okay, you could point to the fact the first hour they kind of, you know, they lost away after going a goal behind, 3-0. It could have been a lot worse, as we mentioned before. There were chances Harry Kane hit the post twice. But what impressed me about West Ham yesterday was that they fought back. And you know, quite often when you have a manager under pressure, that transmits itself to the team, and maybe not everybody's always pulling in the right direction. That certainly wasn't the case yesterday. That the team looked 100% solid behind Bilic. I think when you have that kind of fighting spirit against a very good Tottenham team, you can't really point the finger at the manager and say, you know, you've lost this group of players. Absolutely not. He will be under pressure simply because they're not winning games. And they're slipping down the table alarmingly. This wasn't supposed to be a season when they were doing this. This was supposed to be a season where they maybe would go the other way and press for a Europa League position. But that's not happening at the moment.
I don't think anyone doubts Bilic's motivational powers, and I'm with you as you say. The players, I think there's some defensive organisational powers. They're a team that just need to get, even when they're playing badly, they just need to shore up. I mean, there was watching some of the defensive mistakes yesterday. Looked like just disorganisation. You've got a back line that is higgledy-piggledy, or you know, people just don't look secure about. I am here. I am drilled. This is what we do. And I think, I think he's, a decent manager, but I think there is some definitely tightening up, particularly defensively. That that's his job. He's got to get on top of that.
Yeah,
it's quite ironic. Yesterday, the fans obviously wanted Andy Carroll on the pitch. When he came on the pitch, he made two sort of catastrophic mistakes, really, that contributed.
The trouble
to
is Andy Carroll is when he's on the pitch, they want him off the pitch, and when he's off the pitch, they want him on the pitch. Don't they? He's one of those players. Another story I want to talk about in the Sunday Express this morning. Philippe Coutinho. The Football League's website yesterday released details of some of the emails exchanged between Barcelona and Liverpool. And Liverpool, it does appear, true to their words in the exchanges with Barcelona, that Coutinho wasn't for sale. But do you worry about the wider implications of all these emails about top-class footballers, their salaries, the transfer fees that are being negotiated between these clubs? Do you worry about these emails that are being routinely hacked, released into the public domain via various websites, Paul?
Not really. I don't worry about it because I think football's a very opaque business. Football needs more transparency. You know, if you go through the average transfer window, the amount of misinformation and disseminating and lying that goes on, frankly, in a transfer window. I think these clubs are now accustomed to thinking that they can do and say what they like to suit their own political needs. And some of them are deceiving their supporters, not just the media. So anything that kind of sheds light on that, to me, is fair game.
I mean, what drives me mad when you see at transfer windows or the close of windows, undisclosed fee. Why is it undisclosed? You know, why should it be a kind of state secret?
Yeah.
I would say, obviously, when you're talking individual salaries, that's often a difficult area because people don't like to, make it public to the world
American sport is
what they're earning. But American sport, everybody knows exactly what NFL players, baseball players, basketball players are earning. Why that should be different to the average man in the street who maybe doesn't want his salary level known.
I think every transfer deal should be broken down and published. So who got what from every transfer deal, and then you'd see how many people are in the chain.
Certainly, in terms of agents, we would want to see that, wouldn't we?
Well, that's the interesting proposition here, Steve, because the agent in this case, according to the emails, assuming that they are accurate, stood to make £9 million if the deal for Coutinho went through. So if Barcelona are prepared to pay that kind of money, does that encourage the agent to coerce his client to make the moves, to make sure this move happens?
Well, you'd almost certainly say yes, wouldn't you? And we're not going to say no to that because it's a huge amount of money. And listen, we've seen some big transfer deals recently. Obviously, Manchester United signing Paul Pogba for 89 million, Mino Raiola took a huge slice of that. I think the work of agents has always been a slight mystery to me. They're just fixers. They're just putting you and you together. Why does that sort of
well, less
mean a fee of 5 million?
Less fixers than agitators if there's 9 million quid in it for you.
I mean, this is a slightly bad example because Coutinho would have wanted to go to Barcelona anyway from Liverpool. So you probably didn't need to pay the agent £9 million to make that happen. But there will.
I don't suppose he's getting 9 million quid now that Coutinho stays, does he?
No.
It's not It's not £9 million either way. It's 9 million quid if you get him out.
Sure. Yeah. But there will be
and I
cases.
think he may well do. He may well do. I don't think you can, with Coutinho, I don't think you can have a kind of summer where there's been so much division between him and the club, and he clearly wanted to leave. I don't think that ever fully repairs, particularly as Paul says, when it's a club like Barcelona that want you.
Well, I was at Leicester yesterday and he played like he thought he was playing for Barcelona, judging by his performance. OK, next up we're going to talk about Mourinho and Pep Guardiola. They say we should revamp the League Cup. What changes can we make to the competition? We'll talk about that next. OK, brutal assessment of the League Cup this morning in Neil Moxley's column in The People. He says nothing can save the League Cup, but we must ensure the FA Cup doesn't go the same way. The intro, Neil's intro says the League Cup is dying, Matt. Neil makes the point about the attendances. Mauricio Pochettino talking about it earlier in the week. Jose Mourinho, of course, at Manchester United saying it would be helpful if we didn't have to play it. Pep Guardiola saying, having much the same sentiments. Are they right, guys?
Well, I think it is dying a slow death. There are only two ways about it. I think the one thing you do have to remember is that those are the views of the elite. Those are the views of the guys who are looking forward to the Champions League and how they're going to juggle their squad. Those aren't the views of League Two, League One clubs who, A, get a chance to play the big guys, B, get the trickle down, and it is, to them, feels like a trickle of the riches. So if you are going to get rid of it, and I think there's an adult conversation to be had about that, you've also got to work out how you're going to somehow compensate those clubs, A, for, say, the lack of a sort of day in the sunshine, and B, for the loss of finance. And we all know that, English football does push some money down, but it feels like a trickle. So do I think the League Cup is dying? Yeah, it's pretty hard to argue otherwise. I mean, it's a pretty slow death, and it's an incremental death. It's, we have this sort of debate every year when there's another empty stadium at the top end. So, yes, I think that adult discussion about possibly scrapping it has to happen, but it has to happen with, say, not just from the elite end of this is a pain in the backside, let's get rid of it, to hang on a minute, how do Halifax feel about it?
Totally scrap or revamp, Matt? Find a way to change the competition.
I'm not sure a revamp works. I mean, to be honest, as Neil makes the point, is the FA Cup is, we have this debate about the FA Cup, never mind, not about scrapping it, but about its place in the calendar, the fact that so many teams, even top, teams are putting out reserves in it, how much do people care? And I think maybe if we get rid of the League Cup, does it sort of bolster the FA Cup's position maybe a little bit? But I think, I don't think sticking something in its place, the point is to sort of, cut away stuff. But I think, so I don't see that there's a sort of, ready-made replacement for it.
No.
But I do worry about, it's easy for Jose Mourinho or Pep Guardiola to say that, isn't it?
The thing is,
Come on, Rocky, make a case for it.
Well, I will. I actually prefer it to the FA Cup because it gives you a chance to see players you don't normally see.
Tell this man.
Sorry. And also that'll be the FA, no doubt. Yeah.
It's a bit late for the FA. That could be the Football League.
Yes. No, I prefer it to the FA Cup because you see players you don't normally see, and also the clubs who are complaining most about it seem to be the clubs with the bigger squads. So. And actually, I don't know why Mourinho's saying this, because Manchester United winning the League Cup last year gave them a big kick, didn't it? And that was the start of their rise, really. So I quite like it. But it's over-commercialised. Once you start calling it the Carabao Cup and holding the draw in Thailand, that gets a bit embarrassing.
The strange thing about Jose's comments are, I was at the Burton game in midweek, and he fielded virtually his first team.
Yeah.
Lukaku was on the bench, obviously, but he played Rashford, he played Martial, he played Mata, he played all these big guns.
But that's a
more or
strategy
less.
from Mourinho, isn't it, with the League Cup?
Yeah,
it's a message, isn't it?
But if he's that
won it 4
concerned about
times.
sort of either burnout for his players or them playing too many games at this point in the season when they've got Champions League coming up this week, he should have played. He should have played a much more inexperienced team than he did do. And with Paul as well, that kind of actually kick-started his Manchester United career, winning that final against Southampton last year at the end of February. It gave him a massive kind of
And they were lucky
platform.
to win that final, weren't they?
And he wasn't complaining then that day. I can't remember him complaining what a kind of rubbish competition it was.
Yeah. Paul just made the point about the draw for the Carabao Cup being made at ungodly hours, certainly for people who live in this country. Does that influence your thinking in terms of your views towards the competition, or is it just more grist to the mill?
Yeah, the Football League haven't helped themselves with that. There's no two ways about it. I mean, there's been a couple of sort of botches around the draw, and it's I mean, there's no two ways. You speak to people at the Football League about it, they'll accept that they are sort of searching for a place in the world with it. I mean, I don't mean they dispute. Obviously they'll say this is a long valued competition. Mm-hmm. It's got a lot of tradition involved, and as you say, there's a lot of hypocrisy from the top clubs about it. But at the same time, they're not going to dispute that they're having to work very hard. When you're doing draws at 3 a.m, or whatever, the marketing department have taken over a sporting competition.
Yeah.
That's the issue. And when that is happening, then you've got a problem, haven't you?
Yeah, when you cheapen something you're trying to protect, that you've got a problem then.
Yeah. Okay. So we want to change the League Cup. What about the Champions League? You happy with that? Satisfied with that?
I mean, I think it's certainly when we get to the knockout rounds, I don't think it ever lets you down, does it? I mean, it's
But what about the group stages? Paris Saint-Germain go to Celtic and win 5-0. Chelsea beat Qarabag 6-0 at Stamford Bridge. Liverpool, they draw 2-2 with Sevilla in the group phase.
I think we'd all like more jeopardy earlier. I don't mean there's two ways about it, but that's the fact is that remember when we had 2 group phases. I mean the big clubs are I mean the power they wield on this is unanswerable. I mean you are not going to get to a point of straight knockout. It is just never going to happen. In some ways, the challenge is to fight the opposite trend of big clubs almost being guaranteed a place through group stages. I mean we've seen there is debates are out there, isn't it, about effectively guaranteed places in the Champions League.
The problem with the group stage is that you're always going to, at the end of that, you're always going to have dead games, and those dead games seem to be creeping slightly earlier now in the group, especially when you've got clubs who are so dominant like PSG, and Celtic's last couple of games. I don't know, will that really matter in that group? Not so sure.
Not if they keep losing 5-0. Wenger's comments have provoked this debate, really. I should just say what Wenger has to say. Yes, he misses being in the Champions League. They're in the Europa League, of course, Arsenal. Do I still follow it? I still think the group stage, there are not many interesting games, so I choose 1 or 2 that are interesting. It's routine in the group stage. Look at the audiences. It's lost some of its attraction and some of its power. Does he have an argument, or is he just, this is a guy you're in the Europa League, mate?
Well, you don't get 20,000 people turning up, I suppose.
Off.
You don't get that element of excitement like Arsenal did in the Europa League.
No, exactly.
No, he's obviously trying to. He's mourning his loss, I would say, put it that way. Yeah,
and unnecessary. It was unnecessary then. Okay. Quick chat on Rooney. Elbowed yesterday in a collision with Francis at Bournemouth up at Goodison Park. Tough week for him, difficult week for him, of course, because of the drink driving conviction. Yesterday played for Everton, matters on the field. But current state of mind, Steve, in terms of Rooney, because I know you've always been close to his particular situation when he came through at Everton, then Manchester United and back to Everton. But what does the future hold for him?
Well, I think he's been caught up at the moment, obviously, in things he'd rather not be.
Yeah.
Of his own doing, obviously, so he can't complain about that. Also, on the wider picture, Everton have had a really tough start, and the microscope is on them. I think they've had 2 good wins this week, which will maybe settle things down a little bit and kind of calm talk about Koeman's future. People suggested that when Rooney left Manchester United, that would be the end of the Rooney circus. Quite clearly, it's not going to be that. I think that kind of circus and focus and attention will always be on Wayne Rooney.
He's played a big. Let's be honest, he's played a big part in that, though, Steve, hasn't he?
Oh, he has, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, he's been captain of Manchester United, captain of England. Some of the choices he's made have maybe not been the best ones. I think looking at that, he would love a situation where he can just get on with being an Everton player and try to use his experience to help Everton. Whether he'll ever be left out of the spotlight, I'm not so sure.
Remorseful in his statement after that
was,
conviction. Yeah. After that, do we accept that at face value?
Well, there's not a lot else you can do. I mean, he's clearly being heavily punished now with his community service order to make amends for that.
Yeah, OK, that's Wayne Rooney. OK, next up, we're going to talk Brighton Newcastle, how the two clubs are adjusting to life in the Premier League. OK, it's Brighton Newcastle at the Amex a bit later on this afternoon. Paul is actually going to that game. It's a nice piece with Glenn Hoddle and Chris Hughton, former teammates at Tottenham Hotspur, of course, back at White Hart Lane in the day. Glenn interviewing Chris Hughton this morning alongside Rob Draper. You get used to the abuse, but I won't forget. He talks about some of the abuse that he suffered as a young Tottenham player coming through the ranks, but it is a fascinating read to trawl through their time together at Tottenham. But he's made his name in his own right as a football manager. We know all about his career as a football player, but how has he adjusted to life in the Premier League with Brighton, having been there before, of course, with Newcastle United, but being sacked far too early by Mike Ashley, and a mistake that Mike Ashley has subsequently admitted making?
He started very well, as you'd expect, from a manager of his quality and with his experience. He set out with the idea that the team has to be well organised, tough to beat. That's elementary, I think, when you get promoted, isn't it? And he's kept everybody calm. He got them through the culture shock of the first couple of games when they looked a bit spooked, against Manchester City and Leicester. They've settled down since then, picked up some points. The problem he's got is that he's short of strikers, Premier League quality strikers. He's going to have to try and get through to January, by which time maybe the club will maybe have to spend over the odds if they need to get a striker in to get them goals. That's his handicap at the moment, but he's very well equipped to make the best of what he has.
Does he see?
And he has some good players.
Yeah. Does he see the Premier League as a completely different challenge to the challenge he had getting Brighton out of the Championship?
Well, it's interesting with a club like that because they think long term. There's a huge kind of evolution going on there, and they've developed the stadium and the training ground are magnificent. But if you're thinking long term all the time, maybe sometimes you can forget that the short term objective is to stay in the Premier League. You just have to stay there, don't you, for a couple of seasons, and then you can get back to the long term development side of it. He knows that, and all his thoughts obviously will be concentrated on just getting through to the end of the season in a respectable position and getting the team used to life in the Premier League and getting them to develop, but with that very short-term goal in mind of sticking in the division.
Have they shown any fear at all? That you any anxiety, trepidation, any kind of fears about playing at the elite level of English football?
No, they did in the first couple of games. I think I think the concentration levels were a bit off. They looked, as I said, just slightly spooked by it, but since then I think he got them together basically before the West Brom game and said, look, we're in a different world now and you have to adjust to it. You have to switch your mind on to this completely different set of challenges in front of you. And the players responded really well to that. An interesting game today because Newcastle, they were promoted at the same time as Brighton. They've suddenly gone off on a bit of a spurt. Players look enthusiastic all of a sudden, and Newcastle look a half-decent side. So that game for Brighton today is really important because they need to win their home games and they need to put teams like Newcastle sort of in their place, really.
Yeah. They've got good examples to follow. They have, say, Bournemouth and Burnley as well, to an extent, that didn't come up and suddenly throw fortunes at it. Watford had a bigger turnover, haven't they, of totally different model of turning over players and coaches, whereas Bournemouth, if it's built on a coach who knows exactly what he wants from that group. I mean, it's still, it's going to be fine lines, isn't it? But
I think so.
There are models that have shown it can work.
There are models. The only danger is if there's just a tiny rumbling of fans saying, well, the team needs to be more positive, but he knows exactly what he's doing, Chris Hughton, and he will be as positive as he can be within the overall aim of not conceding goals.
The opposition this afternoon is Newcastle United, promoted last season. Rafa Benitez talks. People are talking about the Champions League and all these things, but we are realistic. When you hear a manager talk in those terms, and I know it's not Benitez, but the question has clearly been put to him. You've had a good start. Could you start dreaming of finishing in the top 4 and playing Champions League football next season? Is this the latest example of a group of supporters getting carried away with a promising early season start?
No, absolutely, yeah. I mean, particularly on Tyneside, where they have in the past have had really high expectations and been the nearly men on many occasions.
This goes right back to the stereotypes we were talking about at the top of the show.
They're getting excited, and you know, why not? I think in Rafa they have one of maybe the top 10 coaches in the world game. He's a coach who's managed Real Madrid. He's won the Champions League with Liverpool. He's won the Europa League with Chelsea. He's got a big pedigree. Newcastle are lucky in a way to have him, and quite clearly they're sort of revelling in this start. But I suspect that a lot of them, come the end of the season, will be glad if Newcastle are just still in that division, as Paul's alluded to the fact with Brighton, and I think both those clubs today, their main weapon for me is their managers. Chris Hughton's experience will be far more valuable probably than any player that Brighton possess in this campaign, and I think the thing for Rafa is the same. I'm glad Rafa has now kind of moved away from that early season kind of confrontation and locking horns with Mike Ashley, which really wasn't doing anybody any good. Look, the transfer window's closed now. Get on with the job with what you have. And Newcastle, quite clearly, in the last 3 games, have shown that they're a decent team. Yeah, no, they certainly have. OK, we'll watch them in action later this afternoon because they play Brighton down at the Amex in the Premier League. Monday Night Football is Arsenal, West Brom, and Gareth Barry makes his, assuming he's picked by Tony Pulis, will make his 633rd Premier League appearance, which is an astonishing record. An astonishing number of games. He says that when he retires, the first thing he wants to do is go skiing. You'll be able to take him, Max. I know you're a keen skier, aren't you?
Look forward to it.
Or you'll at least be able to tell him where to go. In terms of the modern day challenges that footballers face, how big an achievement is this for Gareth Barry? How significant is it to him?
Yeah, I think longevity is something we certainly should acknowledge in management, because they last 5 minutes. But
what did you want to say? Journalism.
No,
journalism.
I it just started with longevity. Let's carry on. Sorry.
But no, it's. I think, it's. I mean, he's been a very good player. How many England caps did 53. He get? 53. But I mean, sadly there's this association with South Africa and with Germany and it all going wrong. But then, how many? He was
injured going into South Africa, wasn't he?
How many England players do we think of and have a snapshot of a very happy memory? Very, very, very few. I mean, he's had interest. He obviously just talked a lot about how he'd love to have paired with Gerrard club-wise, didn't he? And also, I mean, he's been very good. I don't think he's been top drawer, has he? He's been sort of high on the B list, not on the A list.
I mean, he's never a player who's had a great deal of pace, so that has never been a handicap for him. Has probably helped him extend his career as long as he had. Whereas Ryan Giggs, obviously, who he's going to pass, had a long career but reinvented himself. Yeah, well, Gareth Barry's reinvented himself with several clubs. He won the Premier League, of course, with Manchester City in 2012, FA Cup in 2011. OK, I've run out of time, unfortunately, this morning on the Sunday Supplement. Thanks very much to Paul. See you soon, you and your phone. Matt Dickinson and
I'll be skiing with Gareth Barry.
Yeah, I'm sure you will. Let us know where you are. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. OK, lots of football coming your way. It's all on Sky a bit later this afternoon. First up, of course, is Brighton against Newcastle, 3:30 Sky Sports Premier League and main event. It's followed by Arsenal against West Brom tomorrow night, Monday Night Football from 7. OK, download the Sky Sports app. You can watch the in-game goals and the highlights on your mobile phone. The EFL goals are next from Leagues 1 and 2. Ben and Cammy as well. They've got Stephen Taylor, former Newcastle defender. That's goals on Sunday. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week at 9:30. Bye for now.
Sky Sports. Feel it all.
Last break of the game. Will he score? Oh, yes! Oh, what a finish! You think it's all over?
It is now. Selco, sponsoring Sky Sports Sunday Supplement. It's fun, easy, and most importantly, it's effective.
It's amazing I get these kind of results in such a small amount of time.
I can really feel it work in my abs.
Want to know the secret to great body strength and muscle definition? The WonderCore Smart is Thane's fantastic fitness product designed to target your entire core like a laser, focusing on your upper, middle, lower abs, and your obliques. WonderCore Smart is so effective, it's going to help you get the strong, defined six-pack abs you've always wanted. The secret is in WonderCore Smart's patented design. It has cleverly hidden interlocking springs and precision dials on each side that provide adjustable resistance, so you can choose the workout that's right for you for a muscle-ripping total core workout. But the WonderCore Smart does so much more. After you've really blasted your abs, move on to supported push-ups to sculpt powerful shoulders and a rock-hard core. Then pump the arms for impressive muscular biceps and turn it round to target the triceps for all-over impressive arm definition. Use WonderCore Smart scissor kicks for solid glutes and quads. Finally, finish it all off with cardio-blasting smart stepping to pump the heart and get you in peak physical condition.
It does my abs, it does my legs, it does my triceps, it does everything.
All of this built into one great, cost-effective, easy-to-store, and portable design. Your WonderCore Smart comes as part of a complete system, including an exercise guide, a nutrition guide, plus 2 30-minute workouts. So call or log on now to Thane.tv to order your WonderCore Smart today.
When an accident happens, time stops, and you question everything.
Will I be able to work? Who'll pay the bills?
Injury Lawyers for You will help you get the compensation you deserve. So, if you've had an accident that wasn't your fault, what happens next? Injury Lawyers for You.
Everyone uses their phone differently, so we've got a range of 4G SIMs to match. Our starter SIM is just £5 a month if you've got BT broadband at home, perfect for staying in touch. For just £11 a month, our 3GB Essential SIM handles whatever life throws at you. While for £20 a month, our 15GB Ultimate SIM is great if your phone buzzes and beeps every 5 minutes. And no one gives their customers fast 4G and Wi-Fi in more places than us. So get the SIM that's just right for you. Visit bt.com/mobile or call 0800 032 8877.
So what am I looking at?
Well,
I want to learn how to make movies. That's the fantasy we're selling here.
Baby brother. Still betting, winning.
No matter what comes next, we've already won!
Nothing can keep us from being free.
The X-Men, the Brotherhood, we don't even know if they exist anymore.
My dad's a crook. I'm lying to the police.
Sorry! Hit him!
Sorry! Anything else anyone's got to add?